repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. It's the 16th of April 2016. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I'm your host, Walter, coming to you from the Netherlands, where it's 4 p.m. It's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Welcome, everybody. If you go to UCY.tv, you can find a chat link there. Also, Real Liberty Media has a chat, so you can go to either one, check them out, and also if you like to join the social network Freedoms Network, check it out at freedomsnetwork.com. You may find people there that you already know, and welcome Captain, Cracker, Dan, Grump, Jules, Possible, Sure, Shy, and Vince. Welcome, everybody. How you doing over there? Has the winter finally left, or are you guys still shivering in cold? It feels like early summer has started here. The last couple of weeks, everything is growing very fast. And today we're going to start with stopthelie.com. That's where you can get this. Joe Plummer, I sent him an email. I've asked if it was alright if I read this on air, and he said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And this is, as far as I understand it, a small version, so to speak, of Tragedy and Hope, written by Carol Quigley. And I didn't know until recently, that's if I heard it correct. Sometimes my attention is a bit too divided. But in 1966, he actually made it public that the CFR existed. And I'm not quite sure about the Royal Institute of International Affairs, but they both were classified as secret organizations before that time. And maybe that holds true for like the Trilateral Commission, things like that. There's also a Asia-like organization like that. And of course in Europe we have the ECFR, the European Council on Foreign Relations. And there's a nice, maybe that's where I got it from, nice podcast that Tragedy and Hope, Peace Revolution number 18. It's not very long, but you get to hear a professor speak about history. And he also points to Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope. Alright. So check it out at stopthelie.com. Tragedy and Hope Made Easy. And this is chapter 1. The Introduction by Edward Griffin. If you have ever watched an illusionist perform up-close magic, you know the power of misdirection and sleight of hand. Even in a room full of suspicious and attentive observers, the illusionist can fool them all by exploiting known weaknesses in the human mind and employing his tools of the trade. He will deceive the crowd whether it wants to be deceived or not. Imagine what an equally talented network of political illusionists can accomplish. Yeah, that's what's been said also in some broadcasts that I've listened to, that what the politicians do, they were talking about political illusionists here, is they are like sorcerers, is the claim, performing before an audience of mostly trusting and casual observers, exploiting known weaknesses in the human mind and employing their tools of the trade. They, too, will deceive the crowd whether it wants to be deceived or not. Having spent nearly 60 years of my life researching and writing about the illusionists who control our world, I can say, without reservation, that you are about to learn some of their closest held secrets. Joe has done an outstanding job of weeding through Carol Quigley's book Tragedy and Hope. He has captured the essence of what Quigley referred to as the network, and made this important information accessible to the average person who simply doesn't have time to read a 1,300-page history book. Even for those who intend to read the entire volume, Joe has created an introduction and study guide that will serve the serious student well. Yeah, what I was planning on doing, if that's alright with you guys in the chat, if you don't want this, then just say so. But while we go through the chapters that Joe has created, we should probably here and there pick out some names or places or events and see if they come up in the brain that Richard Grove has provided us with, and see what we can learn further. Alright, so knowledge of who Carol Quigley was and the deceptions that he revealed is essential for understanding the real world of today. His close relationship with the network and his approval of its aims made it possible to provide an insider's analysis of the minds and methods of the global elite. Without this knowledge, the actions of those who dominate the United States government and the Western world do not make sense. With it, everything falls into place. Be forewarned. The journey you are about to begin is not for the faint-hearted. If you are comfortable with the illusions that currently pass for political reality, this book is not for you, because once you discover how the deceivers perform their magic, the comfort of ignorance is no longer possible. Once the bell is rung, it cannot be unrung. The bell starts ringing on the next page, which is chapter 1, Democracy. Have you ever felt like democracy is just an illusion? Have you ever suspected that there are very powerful people who've created a system that appears to be democratic but actually cuts ordinary citizens out of the decision-making process? Have you ever wondered who is really running things and what exactly are they trying to achieve? If you have, you are not alone. Fortunately, a Harvard-educated history professor named Carol Quigley wrote a handful of books that answer all of these questions and more. Unfortunately, the answers are very disturbing, especially to those who have accepted the common myths of democratic government. In Quigley's work, we discover that national constitutions are routinely undermined by the leaders who are elected to defend them. We learn that all social instruments tend to become institutions, regardless of their benevolent origin, and from that point forward, the institution is run for the benefit of those who control it, at the expense of its original purpose. Perhaps most unsettling, Quigley reveals that real power operates behind the scenes, in secrecy, and with little to fear from so-called democratic elections. He proves that conspiracies, secret societies, and small, powerful networks of individuals are not only real, they are extremely effective at creating or destroying entire nations and shaping the world as a whole. We learn that representative government is, at best, a carefully managed con game. That's my ciggy. Rolling my ciggy. Since these disturbing truths contradict nearly everything our government, education system, and media have taught us to believe, many will immediately dismiss them as nonsense. Only wild-eyed conspiracy theorists believe such things, they will say. However, there's one big problem. Carol Quigley was no wild-eyed conspiracy theorist. Quite the contrary. Quigley was a prominent historian who specialized in studying the evolution of civilizations as well as secret societies. He studied history at Harvard University, where he earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees. He taught at Princeton University, Harvard University, and the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He worked as an advisor to the U.S. Defense Department, the U.S. Navy, and the Smithsonian Institution. In short, Carol Quigley was a well-connected and well-credentialed member of Ivy League society. Based on his own words and his training as a historian, it appears that he was chosen by members of a secret network to write the real history of their rise to power. However, as Quigley later realized, these individuals did not expect or intend for him to publish their secrets for the rest of the world to see. Shortly after publishing Tragedy and Hope in 1966, the network apparently made its displeasure known to Quigley's publisher, and the book he had spent 20 years writing was pulled from the market. As Quigley recounts, the original edition published by Macmillan in 1966 sold about 8,800 copies, and sales were picking up in 1968 when they ran out of stock, as they told me. But in 1974, when I went after them with a lawyer, they told me that they had destroyed the plates in 1968. They lied to me for 6 years, telling me that they would reprint when they got 2,000 orders, which could never happen because they told anyone who asked that it was out of print and would not be reprinted. They denied this until I sent them Xerox copies of such replies to libraries, at which they told me it was a clerk's error. In other words, they lied to me but prevented me from regaining the publication rights by doing so. Rights revert back to the copyright holder if the book is out of print, but not if the book is simply out of stock. Powerful influence in this country want me, or at least my work, suppressed. Yeah, there's a rare interview available also on the internet where he speaks to somebody, I don't know who. Now you can hear him tell the whole story. It's about, what is it, half hour, 3/4 of an hour or so? It continues with the next heading. A book like no other. If you decide to read Tragedy and Hope, the first thing you're likely to notice is its size. At over 1,300 pages, approximately 600,000 words, and weighing in around 5 pounds, it's safe to say that it wasn't written for the casual reader. Nor was it written like a novel, bursting with scandalous and interesting conspiratorial tidbits on every page. Rather, as one would expect from an Ivy League historian, it is a long and often tedious read, of which 95% consists of basic economic, political, and diplomatic history. However, within the other 5%, you'll find some truly astonishing admissions about the existence, nature, and effectiveness of covert power. In both Tragedy and Hope and The Anglo-American Establishment, quickly reveals the existence of a secret network that formed to bring all the habitable portions of the world under its control. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims and have, for much of my life, been close to it and many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to a few of its policies. But in general, my chief difference in opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. Quigley informs us that the wealthy Anglophile network cooperates with any group that can help it achieve its goal. This includes communists, which, on the surface, would seem to be the sworn enemy of super-wealthy capitalist conspirators. He chronicles how the network formed in the late 1800s. In in England and immediately began creating front groups. By 1919 it had formed the Royal Institute of International Affairs, also known as Chatham House. Alright, I didn't know that. I just knew that they were at the same address. I thought they were like two different organizations, but And it went on to create other extremely powerful institutes within the chief British dominions and in the United States. Hiding behind these front groups, the network began secretly exercising its power. In the United States, the main institute was named the Council on Foreign Relations, which quickly described as a front for J.P. Morgan and Company. All right. Hold on, guys. See if this works. That's from where quickly describes J.P. Morgan and Company using the Council on Foreign Relations as a front is at Tragedy and Hope, the book, page 952. Before long, the network expanded its operations, spreading like cancer into our universities, media, and especially government foreign policy. On this basis, which was originally financial and goes back to George Peabody, and there's the 9, so we'll see what the 9 says here. 9. While we're on the topic of front groups, it's worth noting that Rothschild's interests likely used Morgan as a front man. In The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, Eustace Mullins writes on page 49, soon after he arrived in London, George Peabody was surprised to be summoned to an audience with the gruff Baron Nathan Mayer Rothschild. Without mincing words, Rothschild revealed to Peabody that much of the London aristocracy openly disliked Rothschild and refused his invitations. He proposed that Peabody, a man of modest means, be established as a lavish host whose entertainments would soon be the talk of London. Rothschilds would, of course, pay all the bills. Peabody accepted the offer and soon became known as the most popular host in London. It's hardly surprising that the most popular host in London would also become a very successful businessman, particularly with the House of Rothschild supporting him behind the scenes. Quickly acknowledges that the Morgan firm originated as George Peabody and Company on pages 326 and on 945 of Tragedy and Hope. Alright, so that was 9. On this basis, which was originally financial and goes back to George Peabody, there grew up in the 20th century a power structure between London and New York which penetrated deeply into university life, the press, and the practice of foreign policy. In England, the center was the Round Table Group, while in the United States it was J.P. Morgan and Company, or its local branches in Boston, Philadelphia, and Cleveland. Alright, Round Table Group, what's that? See if we can copy that. Can we find that on the brain? Where's my brain page? There it is. And put that in the search box, see if we get anything. Clickety click, pastety paste. Yes. That's this one. And there we go. Ta-da. Open that in a new. This. Okay, so now it's called the Round Table, apparently. It's at www.commonwealthroundtable.co.uk. And what is this? Let's see if you guys got a who are we thingy. Don't see any. Maybe here. Themes. Bookshelf. History. Let's see. History. The Round Table first appeared in 1910 with the subtitle A Quarterly Review of the Politics of the British Empire, as well as regular articles from around the then British Empire. It promised informed analysis of wider aspects of colonial and imperial affairs, and of international relations more generally. Early issues included articles on Anglo-German rivalry, Japanese ambitions in East Asia, the foreign policy of the United States, and trends in contemporary Islam. Many of the Round Table's founders at first supported imperial federation, by which they meant the transfer of control of defense, foreign and colonial policy from Westminster to a new parliament representative of all the self-governing parts of the empire. The years 1910 to 14 saw the issue of a series of Round Table studies of imperial affairs, drawing on the reports of working groups scattered around the empire. The First World War put an end to this activity, and also to any realistic hopes for imperial federation. During the course of their studies, the Round Table members hit upon what they claimed to be the distinctive feature of the British Empire, that it was a commonwealth, committed to increasing self-government and equality amongst its members. Well, that's putting it rather strange, I would say. Since British rule, as far as my history lessons go back, especially since around 1500s and onward, ever since, has been brutal. And that's putting it mildly. The new emphasis led to a change in the journal's subtitle 1990 to A Quarterly Review of the Politics of the British Commonwealth. It became A Quarterly Review of the British Commonwealth Affairs in 1948. A Quarterly Review of Commonwealth Affairs in 1966, and the Commonwealth Journal of International Affairs in 1983. It also led to the Round Table's support for and involvement in moves towards the increasing self-government in the empire, notably in connection with the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 and the Indian reforms of 1919 and 1935. Now, it says here here, we started a minute or two ago, many of the Round Table's founders at first supported blah 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 they don't name any people, right? They don't name any of these founders. Well, it's probably easy to find out who they were, but still, it should be in here. In the 1920s and 30s, members of the Round Table continued to advocate close cooperation between Britain and the now fully self-governing dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, but also alignment and increasing cooperation with the USA in the 1930s, largely because of these concerns, some members were prominently associated with the policy of appeasement of Weimar and then Nazi Germany. The Round Table itself carried articles both supporting and opposing appeasement, reflecting a split in the editorial board. That seems odd. This is done on purpose. Don't let yourself be fooled here. That's to create confusion. That's the only reason. The Second World War marked that's no mistake, right? Reflecting a split in the editorial board. No. The editorial board was still one voice, and their aim was to create confusion. That's what it is. The Second World War marked a watershed for the Round Table, as for the British Empire. A younger generation of editorial board members came to the fore, though the last of the founders, Lord Brand, there's one, died only in 1963, and the journal became more clearly a journal for the exchange of opinions and analysis rather than the purveyor of a particular point of view. This trend accelerated with the introduction of signed articles in 1966 and the increasingly academic orientation of the journal. Nevertheless, the Round Table's interests in policy matters has ensured that the worlds of journalism, politics, administration and business continue to be represented among both writers and readers of the journal. While the time is long past when members of the editorial board, let alone writers in the journal, can be said to subscribe to a particular viewpoint or to promote a particular set of proposals, the Round Table nevertheless continues to take as its starting point that the Commonwealth remains an organization of significance in international affairs and that it deserves to be taken seriously by academics and other interested contemporary international relations. Right, what else have you got that could be interesting? Probably nothing. African news, Eurasian news, Eurasia news. Yeah. Alright, that's about enough of that. Let's see, click that away. And the Cecil Rhodes Milner Round Table Group. Right, come on. Oh, I want you to do that for me. There we go. The Round Table movement, founded in 1999, was an association of organizations promoting closer union between Britain and its self-governing colonies. Yeah, let's see if we can find anything. Historian Carol Quigley claimed that the Round Table groups were connected to a secret society, which South African diamond baron Cecil Rhodes is believed to have set up with similar goals. Rhodes was believed by some to have formed this secret society in his lifetime. Yeah, this is, I mentioned this like 2-3 months ago, I don't remember, but I told you guys that I had the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes. And we should read that on air, actually, but nobody said that they wanted to hear it, so until now we haven't done so. But that might be a good place to go, actually. Okay, hold on. Where were we? Need to get back to the page where I was. And of course I lost it. There it is. Rhodes was believed by some to have formed this secret society in his lifetime. Yeah, as far as I know, 3 people made his will come true. The secret society is supposed to have been named the Society of the Elect. That's in Tragedy and Hope. Rhodes first formalized his idea with William T. Stead, editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, when he and Stead agreed on the structure of the society. This proposed secret society had an elaborate hierarchical structure based on that of the Jesuits, which comprised at the top the position of General of the Society, a position modeled on the General of the Jesuits, to be occupied by Rhodes, with Stead and Lord Rothschild as his designated successors. An executive committee called the Junta of Three, comprising Stead, Milner, and Reginald Bilal Brett, that's Lord Asher. Then a circle of initiates consisting of a number of notables, including Cardinal Manning, Lord Arthur Balfour, Lord Albert Grey, and Sir Harry Johnston. And outside of this was the Association of Helpers, the broad mass of the society. One of the puzzles surrounding these meetings is whether the Society of the Elect actually came into being. Carroll Quigley claims in Tragedy and Hope that Rhodes' Society of the Elect was not only formally established in 1891, although its first inception existed several years prior, 1889, but that its outer circle, known as the Association of Helpers, was later organized by Milner as the Round Table. Quigley claimed that this secret society actually played a very important role in the history of the British Empire from 1899 to 1940, and that its place in history is so significant that it deserves to be known. Quigley also claimed that this group held nearly total control in writing the history of British imperialism during this period. In several of his wills, Rhodes left money for the continuation of the project. However, in his later wills, Rhodes abandoned the idea and instead concentrated on what became the Rhodes Scholarships, which enabled Commonwealth, American, and German scholars to study for free at Oxford University. That's similar organization. That's not interesting. That's all that's really interesting about what Wiki has to say anyway. Alright, and there's this Rhodes tables, this round table, the Cecil Rhodes Milner Round Table Group, is connected to many things. As you can see here in the brain, and I'll copy that and put that in the chat room. So if you want, you can see and learn to use that tool. Note the sidebars and stuff in the search bar. So it's really too much to mention. They even seem to have a link between Agenda 21 and the United Nations. And it just goes on and on. And what is below is after, what happened after. And what is above is what happened before. And what is on the side is somehow related. So then you know a little bit more about how to use this tool. Alright, let's get back to where we were. It's here. The American branch of this English establishment exerted much of its influence through 5 American newspapers: the New York Times, New York Herald Tribune, Christian Science Monitor, the Washington Post, and the lamented Boston Evening Transcript. In fact, the editor of the Christian Science Monitor was the chief American correspondent, anonymously. It might be mentioned that the existence of this Wall Street Anglo-American axis is quite obvious once it is pointed out. And then that's 10, and that's at page 953 from the real book. If the idea of a powerful Wall Street insiders joining a secret foreign network to establish dominion over all habitable portions of the world and successfully penetrating into university life, the press, and the practice of foreign policy sounds like something you should have heard about, you're right. But the secret to why you haven't is contained in the story itself. The successful penetration of universities, the press, and the government have proven quite useful to those who wish to remain unknown. Next heading is Institute of Pacific Relations. Quickly provides many examples of network infiltration and manipulation. For instance, on pages 132 and 953 of Tragedy and Hope, he exposes yet another front group, called the Institute of Pacific Relations. Because the Institute of Pacific Relations provides priceless insight into the deceptive nature and the true power of the network, we'll briefly cover it here. Let's begin with the final report of a US Senate investigation of the IPR. It stated in part, the IPR has been considered by the American Communist Party and by Soviet officials as an instrument of communist policy, propaganda, and military intelligence. The IPR disseminated and sought to popularize false information, including information originating from Soviet and communist sources. The IPR was a vehicle used by the communists to orient American Far Eastern policies toward communist objectives. Yeah. Institute of Pacific Relations, also available on Wiki if you want to go there. This reminds me of an investigation by the Reese Committee, right? To the average person, it sounds crazy to suggest that a network of super wealthy capitalists is secretly conspiring to gain control of the world. But it sounds even crazier to accuse these same super wealthy capitalists of using their tremendous wealth and power to popularize a system of government, communism, that would, in theory anyway, lead to the destruction of all their wealth and power. Surely, if such an unbelievable story were true, the free press would have shouted it from the rooftops, right? Wrong. Let's jump ahead for a second and look at how quickly described the network-directed media cover-up of the Senate investigation. This is from the book. It soon became clear that people of immense wealth would be unhappy if the investigation went too far, and that the most respected newspaper in the country, closely allied with these men of wealth, would not get excited enough about any revelations to make the publicity worthwhile in terms of votes or campaign contributions. As this demonstrates, the network fully understands the importance of controlling public opinion. This also provides a glimpse into how it can do so. If a disturbing truth isn't reported on by a respected news outlet, it might as well not exist. The vast majority of citizens will remain forever oblivious. Additionally, in this particular case, any senator that insisted on taking the investigation too far would surely face a smear campaign by the same press that was ignoring the IPR story. Shortly thereafter, the people of immense wealth who ordered the smear campaign could be counted on to retaliate financially as well, by shifting all future campaign contribution to a more obedient candidate. Needless to say, this type of influence can drastically affect how much attention an issue receives in the media. The merit and importance of a story will often take a back seat to the wishes of those who have the power to keep it quiet. More importantly, similar tactics of control can be applied in other areas as well. Keep in mind as you read the following short summary of the IPR's activities, because the blueprint for directing perception and policies hasn't changed. In 1951, the Subcommittee on International Security of the Senate Judiciary Committee sought to show that China had been lost to the communists by the deliberate actions of a group of academic experts on the Far East and communist fellow travelers whose work in that direction was controlled and coordinated by the Institute of Pacific Relations. The influence of the communists in IPR is well established, but the patronage of Wall Street is less well known. The headquarters of the IPR and of the American Council of IPR were both in New York and were closely associated on an interlocking basis. Each spent about $2.5 million, nearly $30 million when adjusted for inflation, over the quarter century from 1925 to 1950, of which about half in each case came from the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, which were themselves interlocking groups controlled by an alliance of Morgan and Rockefeller interests in Wall Street. Much of the rest came from firms closely allied to these two Wall Street interests, such as Standard Oil, International Telephone and Telegraph, International General Electric, the National City Bank, and the Chase National Bank. On the network's influence over Far East policy. There is considerable truth in the ... contention that the American experts on China were organized into a single interlocking group which had a general consensus of a leftish character. It is also true that this group, from its control of funds, academic recommendations, and research or publication opportunities, could favor persons who accepted the established consensus and could injure, financially or in professional advancement, persons who did not accept it. It is also true that the established group, by its influence on book reviewing in the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, the Saturday Review, a few magazines including the liberal weeklies, and in the professional journals, could advance or hamper any specialist's career. It is also true that these things were done in the United States in regard to the Far East by the Institute of Pacific Relations, that this organization had been infiltrated by communists and by communist sympathizers, and that much of this group's influence arose from its access to and control over the flow of funds from financial foundations to scholarly activities. That's at page 935 from the book. Continuing, awards for work in the Far Eastern area required approval or recommendation from members of IPR. Moreover, access to publication and recommendations to academic positions in the handful of great American universities concerned with the Far East required similar sponsorship. And finally, there can be little doubt that consultant jobs on Far Eastern matters in the State Department or other government agencies were largely restricted to IPR-approved people. The individuals who published, who had money, found jobs, were consulted, and who were appointed intermittently to government missions were those who were tolerant of the IPR line. Amazingly, after omitting all of this, quickly somehow concludes, the charges ... accepted and proliferated by the neo-isolationists in the 1950s and by the radical right in the 1960s that China was quote-unquote lost because of this group, or that the members of this group were disloyal to the United States, or engaged in espionage, or were participants in a conscious plot, or that the whole group was controlled by Soviet agents or even by the communists, is not true. All right. So what are you supposed to make of it then? Is he hinting at people controlling the communists? Unnamed people or something? I don't know. Because this sounds like contradiction, and I don't expect him to make contradictions, right? So that's why you need to start thinking. What's he talking about? In Quigley's defense, the last part of this statement is obviously accurate. The group wasn't controlled, here we go, by Soviet agents or even communists. Rather, according to Quigley himself, the group was controlled by a secret network of individuals who have no aversion to cooperating with the communists. No. That seemed that's also clear by and I checked this myself, the export of food by the United States to the Soviet Union in the Cold War, and not just 1 year, no, years and years. Right? So if you're in a Cold War, or so-called war, that's fun. It's a funny one, right? And, you wouldn't, like, feed your enemy, right? It's his own, it's Russia's own problem that Stalin murdered all the farmers. Let's continue. Or any other groups, and frequently does so. But does this fact somehow exonerate him from a charge of disloyalty? Does it change the nature of their conscious plot to fabricate consensus on US policy toward China? Does it lessen their impact on the ultimate fate of China? No. This is one of many cases where Quigley expresses a clear bias towards the network and its instruments. Clearly, this bias clouds his judgment. For instance, he repeatedly describes the network's methodical deception of others, but apparently he never questions whether he too might have been deceived. He describes the carnage of their mistaken policies, but their good intentions are always accepted without a second thought. Alright, so I don't believe in their mistaken policies. Alright? Normal people might say, well, government is broken, it's not working as it should. No, on the contrary, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and it does not make mistakes. They hire the best people they can get from your tax money. They don't mistake in their policies. Combine this favorable bias with the open attempt for the radical right and neo-isolationists, and poorly reasoned conclusions are nearly unavoidable. His casual dismissal of the IPR's role in the fate of China provides but one shining example. That Quigley can admit that the IPR has tremendous financial and political power, a specific agenda, and actually achieved its goals, but then attribute the rise of Mao Zedong solely to the incompetence and corruption of Chiang Kai-shek's regime is difficult to explain. A side note. It is worth mentioning that shortly after the creation of the IPR in 1925, the Civil War in China conveniently began. One possible reason, this is conjecture, he says between brackets, for why the network might have preferred a communist regime in China is found in the following statement. From the broadest point of view, the situation was this. The rivalry between the two superpowers, the United States and Soviet Union, could be balanced and its tensions reduced only by the coming into existence of another great power on the landmass of Eurasia. There were three possibilities of this: a federated and prosperous Western Europe, India, or China. The first was essential, one of the others were highly desirable, and possibly all three might be achievable, but in no case was it essential or even desirable for the new great power to be allied with the United States. If the Soviet Union were boxed in by the allies of the United States, it would feel threatened by the United States and would seek security by more intensive exploitation of its resources in a military direction, with a natural increase in world tension. If, on the other hand, the Soviet Union were boxed in by at least two great neutral powers, it could be kept from extensive expansion by One, the initial strength of such great powers, and two, the possibility that these powers would ally with the United States if the Soviet Union put pressure on them. The great game of playing one side off another, engaging in balance of power politics, is discussed many times throughout Quigley's book. I've concluded the reference, no, not concluded, I've included the reference above only because it provides a potentially logical motive, at least logical in the realpolitik sense of the world, for the network's policy toward China. Yeah. Alright guys, it's the top of the hour, so we're gonna have a little break. See what we can do here. Ta-da-da! You guys know what's coming, right? Gotta take a 5-minute 50, I guess, break.
It's another new one called Howdy High. We always talk about the crap going on in this world, but the song's about brotherly love. Just sit back and take a ride with us.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the second hour. You're listening to UCY.tv. And also check out reallibertymedia.com. As 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at Friday. Check out the Freakers Ball. 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fridays. At Real Liberty Media with Grimner. And somebody else, I think also. Moose Girl. Check them out, guys. Let's see. Where were we? Now, returning to Quigley's characterization of the IPR conspiracy and the subsequent lack of media coverage referenced earlier. As a result of continuing pressure spurred on by the radical right, the network soon found itself the target of two congressional investigations. Quigley described the second of these investigations, the Reece Committee, this way. Rolling a ciggy. A congressional committee following backward to their source the threads which led from admitted communists like Whittaker Chambers through Alger Hiss and the Carnegie Endowment to Thomas Lamont and the Morgan Bank fell into the whole complicated network of interlocking tax-exempt foundations. The 83rd Congress in July 1953 set up a special committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations with Representative B. Carroll Reece of Tennessee as chairman. It soon became clear that people of immense wealth would be unhappy if the investigations went too far, and that the most respected newspapers of the country, closely allied with these men of wealth would not get excited enough about any revelations to make the publicity worthwhile in terms of votes or campaign contributions. An interesting report showing the left-wing associations of the interlocking nexus of tax-exempt foundations was issued in 1954 rather quietly. 4 years later, the Rees Committee's General Counsel, René A. Wormser, wrote a shocked but not shocking book on the subject called Foundations, Their Power and Influence. Quickly then closes this chapter on the network with the following. The financial circles of London and those of the United States, of the eastern United States, reflect one of the most powerful influences in the 20th century, American and world history. The two ends of this English-speaking axis have sometimes been called, perhaps facetiously, the English and American establishments. There is, however, a considerable degree of truth behind the joke, a truth which reflects a very real power structure. It is this power structure with which the radical right in the United States has been attacking for years in the belief that they are attacking communism. Again, as Quickly points out, the power structure that he exposed isn't loyal to communism or socialism or fascism or capitalism. The network is happy to exploit the rhetoric of any movement or ideology, prop up any dictator or tyrant, and support any economic or political model, provided it serves their one overarching aim. That aim, to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control, is as old as the lust for power itself. The death and suffering that their policies have already caused in pursuit of this aim are incalculable. Allowing them to continue as they have will only bring more of the same. As W. Cleon Skousen states in The Naked Capitalist, as I see it, the great contribution which Dr. Kell Quickly unintentionally made by writing Tragedy and Hope was to help the ordinary American realize the utter contempt which the network leaders have for ordinary people. Human beings are treated en masse as helpless puppets on an international chessboard where giants of economic and political powers subject them to wars, revolution, civil strife, confiscation, subversion, indoctrination, manipulation, and deception. Skousen hit the nail on the head. Tragedy and Hope revealed something even more important than one of the most powerful influences in the 20th century, American and world history. It inadvertently revealed the mindset of those who wield such power. It exposed the astonishing arrogance and hypocrisy of those who feel they have the right to rule billions of other human beings. If there is one goal for this book, it is to expose the attitude and inherent nature of those who seek to dominate others. Don't worry about remembering all of the dates and names that have been listed. Don't worry about trying to recall all of the specific events. All of that information will always be here if you need to find it again. Instead, make it a point to simply verify the following. There is no lie that these men will not tell. There is no crime that they will not commit. The only measure of right and wrong in their view is whether their tactics succeed or fail. This might sound like hyperbole now, but by the end of this book you will understand the truth of this assertion. The network's game is won by those who calculate properly, and moral considerations only impede accurate calculation. An introduction to the realpolitik is the next heading. Henry Kissinger personifies the essence of the network mindset. In his book Diplomacy, he introduces his readers to the amoral concepts of raison d'etat, translated as reasons of state, or state interests, and realpolitik. The basis of both concepts, Kissinger explains, is that individual men can be judged negatively on moral grounds, but governments cannot. When it comes to government action, the only suitable judgment is based on whether or not the government achieves its ends. Throughout his book, Kissinger praises those who are wise enough to govern by these concepts and practically mocks those who object on so-called moral grounds. Yeah, Kissinger says that the end justifies the means. Alright. In praise of Cardinal de Richelieu, something like that, a 17th century French statesman, Kissinger writes, though privately religious, Richelieu viewed his duties as minister in entirely secular terms. Salvation might be his personal objective, but to Richelieu, the statesman, it was irrelevant. Man is immortal. His salvation is hereafter, he once said. The state has no immortality. Its salvation is now or never. In other words, state do not receive credit in any world for doing what is right. They are only rewarded for being strong enough to do what is necessary. That's from that book Diplomacy by Kissinger, page 61. Here's more from it. As the king's first minister, Richelieu subsumed both religion and morality to raison d'etat, reason of state, his guiding light. Richelieu was indeed the manipulator described and did use religion as a tool of manipulation. He would no doubt have replied that he had merely analyzed the world as it was, much as Machiavelli had. Like Machiavelli, he might well have preferred a world of more refined moral sensibilities, but he was convinced that history would judge his statesmanship by how well he had used the conditions and the factors he was given to work with. To clarify, according to statesmen like Kissinger, the moral and legislative laws that limit the actions of ordinary men do not apply to a select few. To escape accountability, the ruling class needs only to invoke the name of the state. This, of course, is the same position held by past rulers who justified theft, deceit, torture, slavery, and slaughter in the name of God. The tactic had simply been modernized. Our new rulers have substituted the state for God, and conveniently for them, they are the state, and not just any state, they are the emerging, omnipotent, global state. Emerging, omnipotent. Though citizens have been conditioned to believe that their statesmen and government instruments are in place to serve them, nothing could be further from the truth. Both the instruments and statesmen are part of an institutional apparatus that exists for the benefit of those who control it. Put another way, the state is nothing more than a collection of men and women who direct the resources and policies of government. Contrary to popular belief, it is an institution that exists for its own sake, to ensure its own salvation, and to prevent the rise of anything that might challenge its power. This is a harsh reality, and some will surely object on the grounds that the modern state is different. After all, it is built on the consent of the people. Democratic elections enable citizens to vote for who their leaders will be. They can choose from Republicans or Democrats. They can throw either out of office if they break their campaign promises. But what if our so-called representative government is all a carefully crafted illusion? What if the network chooses the candidates that we get to vote for? What if the network's experts, not the figureheads placed in official positions of power, are the ones who ultimately determine government policy? What if both political parties, right and left, are controlled by the exact same people? Quickly shine some light on this topic as well. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps on the right and the other on the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. Quickly goes even further when describing the system that's now emerging. It is increasingly clear that in the 20th century the expert will replace ... the democratic voter in control of the political system ... Hopefully the elements of choice and freedom may survive for the ordinary individual, and that he may be free to make a choice between two opposing political groups, even if these groups have little policy choice within the parameters of policy established by the experts. In general, his freedom and choice will be controlled within very narrow alternatives. Does that statement alarm you? Let's hope so. It continues with the next heading, Facing Reality. Using Quigley's work as a starting point, this book will highlight how a small group of dominant men were able to secure control of local, national, continental, and even global policy. Though the power of this network is not complete, they are moving inexorably in that direction. Without increased awareness and resistance, their unelected and unaccountable global state will become a reality. And though the illusion of national sovereignty might be maintained, the freedom of the world's citizens will be controlled within very narrow alternatives. Before moving on to the next chapter, here are some of the key insights that we will cover in this book. I'm going to say one, it just says dash here. So. Real power is unelected. Politicians change, but the power structure does not. The network operates behind the scenes for its own benefit, without ever consulting those who are affected by its decisions. 2. The network is composed of individuals who prefer anonymity. They are satisfied to possess the reality rather than the appearance of power. This approach of secretly exercising power is common throughout history because it protects the conspirators from the consequences of their actions. 3. A primary tactic for directing public opinion and government policy is to place willing servants in leadership positions of trusted institutions, media, university, governments, foundations, etc. If there is ever a major backlash against a given policy, the servant can be replaced. This leaves both the institution and the individuals who actually direct its power unharmed. Historically, those who establish sophisticated systems of domination are not only highly intelligent, they are supremely deceptive and ruthless. They completely ignore the ethical barriers that govern a normal human behavior. Human beings. They do not believe that the moral and legislative laws which others are expected to abide by, apply to them. This gives them an enormous advantage over the masses that cannot easily imagine their mindset. And the last one. Advances in technology have enabled modern rulers to dominate larger and larger areas of the globe. As a result, the substance of national sovereignty had already been destroyed, and whatever remains of its shell is being dismantled as quickly as possible. The new system they are building, which they themselves refer to as a new world order, will trade the existing illusion of democratically directed government for their long-sought, expert-directed, authoritarian technocracy. Right. To be sure, it is difficult to accept these statements upon first hearing them. They challenge our worldview and force us to reconsider everything that we've been taught to believe. It's much easier to dismiss these facts without further investigation. It is easier to accept comforting lies that will alleviate our anxieties, right? Hold on, guys. But this, of course, is exactly the opposite of what must be done. If we allow ourselves to be manipulated, we empower the network at our own expense. Edward Bernays, perhaps more than anyone, helped establish the modern system of public manipulation. Drawing on the psychoanalytical techniques of his uncle Sigmund Freud, Bernays became known as the father of propaganda. His low opinion of the masses is best expressed in his own words. The following quotes are taken from his book, Propaganda. No serious sociologist any longer believes that the voice of the people expresses any divine or specially wise and lofty idea. The voice of the people expresses the mind of the people, and that mind is made up for it by the group leaders, and by those persons who understand the manipulation of public opinion. If we understand the mechanisms No, not the mechanisms. Just drop the S there. And motives of the group mind. Is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing about it? Yeah. If we understand the mechanism of the group mind, right? I was talking to Vince about that yesterday. Also, that is the reason why the trivium, even if it is a watered-down version, as we are told by Kevin Cole with a C. You can find him at tragedyandhope.com. Also, that it had been taken out of educating people, because it's the way that your mind works, right? It says here, if we understand the mechanisms of the group mind, right? How does your mind work? Well, it works grammar, logic, rhetoric. And if you do not know this, then you don't know how your own mind works. And thus you are easily manipulated. Continuing, whatever attitude one chooses towards this condition, we are dominated by the small number of persons who understand the mental processes of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind and contrive new ways to guide the world. Political campaigns today are all sideshows. A presidential candidate may be drafted in response to overwhelming popular demand, but it is well known that his name may be decided upon by a half-dozen men sitting around a table in a hotel room. The conscious manipulation of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Bertrand Russell, historian, philosopher, mathematician, co-founder of analytic philosophy, and expert on the scientific method of human manipulation, describes a global society of experts this way. The society of experts will control propaganda and education. It will teach loyalty to the world government and make nationalism high treason. The government, being an oligarchy, will instill submissiveness into the great bulk of the population. It is possible that it may invent ingenious ways of concealing its own power, leaving the forms of democracy intact, and allowing the plutocrats or politicians to imagine that they are cleverly controlling these forms. Whatever the outward forms may be, all real power will come to be concentrated in the hands of those who understood the art of scientific manipulation. Purveyors of the democratic illusions assure us that the sophisticated conspiracies and powerful secret societies exist only in the mind of paranoids and extremists. Their assurances are a lie. With Quigley as our guide, we'll trace the origins and operations of the network that, by concealing its own power, seeks to secretly dominate our world. Alright, that's the end of chapter 1. So we'll move on to chapter 2. Blah blah. Power Behind the Throne, Chapter 2. As already mentioned, Quigley wasn't your run-of-the-mill historian. Unlike most respected academics, he wasn't afraid to talk about secret conspirators exercising power from the shadows. Nor was he afraid to point out that constitutions, parliaments, presidents, and emperors can all be used as a distraction to divert attention away from the real ruling power behind the throne. As just one example, at about 190 pages into Tragedy and Hope, Quigley sets the record straight regarding the so-called Meiji Restoration in Japan. By all outward appearances, the restoration wrested power away from the shogun and placed it back in the hands of the Japanese emperor. But while the story of the emperor's return to power was spread far and wide, the reality of the situation was quite different. In truth, the restoration had simply shifted power away from the shogun and into the hands of feudal lords who proceeded to rule Japan in the emperor's name and from the emperor's shadow. These leaders, organized in a shadowy group known as the Meiji oligarchy, had obtained complete domination of Japan by 1889. To cover this fact with camouflage, they unleashed a vigorous propaganda of abject submission to the emperor, which culminated in the extreme emperor worship of 1941 to 1945. To provide an administrative basis for their rule, the oligarchy created an extensive government bureaucracy. To provide an economic basis for their rule, this oligarchy used their political influence to pay themselves extensive pensions and government grants, and engaged in corrupt business relationships with their allies in the commercial classes. To provide a military basis for their rule, the oligarchy created a new imperial army and navy and penetrated the upper ranks of those so that they were able to dominate these forces as they dominated the civil bureaucracy. To provide a social basis for their rule, the oligarchy created 5 ranks of nobility recruited from their own members and supporters. Having thus assured their dominant position, the oligarchy in 1889 drew up a constitution which would assure, and yet conceal, their political domination of the country. That's at page 195 of Tragedy and Hope. The oligarchy presented the constitution as an emission from the emperor, setting up a system in which all government would be in his name and all officials would be personally responsible to him. This seemingly legitimate constitution called for a legislative body composed of both an elected House of Representatives and a House of Peers. Though these provisions were enacted, they were essentially meaningless. The form and function of the constitution was of little significance, for the country continued to be run by the Meiji oligarchy through their domination of the army and navy, the bureaucracy, economic and social life, and the opinion-forming agencies such as education and religion. Like all ruling classes, The Meiji maintained control by indoctrinating the masses in an ideology that served the oligarchy's interests. Specifically, they propagated the Shinto ideology, which called for subordination to the emperor. In this system there was no place for individualism, self-interest, human liberties, or civil rights. The Japanese people accepted this Shinto ideology, and as a result, the Meiji oligarchy was able to ruthlessly exploit them in the emperor's name. However, interestingly enough, the Meiji were beholden to an even greater power. Behind them there existed yet another group, numbering no more than a dozen men, which represented the ultimate ruling power in Japan. Quickly explains. These leaders came in time to form a formal, if extra-legal, group known as the Genro. Of this group, Robert Reischauer wrote in 1938, "It is these men who have been the real power behind the throne. It became customary for their opinion to be asked and, more important still, to be followed in all matters of great significance to the welfare of the state. No premier was ever appointed except from the recommendation of these men who became known as the Genro. Until 1922, no important domestic legislation, no important foreign treaty escaped their perusal and sanction before it was signed by the emperor. These men, in their time, were the actual rulers of Japan." Which brings us to the next heading. The nature of secret coercive power. There is a very logical reason why coercive power prefers secrecy and deception. If the goal is to exploit and dominate others, without suffering the natural consequences of doing so, then transparency and honesty are not an option. As such, the basic template of coercive power, often hidden, always deceptive, and exercised in the name of something other than itself, is common throughout history. If the name of God is beyond reproach, then intelligent rulers will exercise their power in the name of God. If invoking the name of democracy, or the state, or the emperor will empower them, they will act in the name of any of these. This is the unchanging characteristic of those who effectively rule the masses. They will say and do anything to establish a system that serves their interests. Stated another way, morality will never stop an individual or group that's willing to lie, steal, intimidate, imprison, torture, or kill in pursuit of their aims. Likewise, a piece of paper with words written on it, a constitution, and an easily manipulated democratic form of government will not stop them either. This latter point is particularly relevant today because the opinion-forming agencies have done everything in their power to convince us otherwise. From a very early age, we are conditioned to believe that a constitution and democratic elections somehow prove that we are in control, that those who seek illegitimate power over our lives cannot succeed with these protections in place. We are never asked to question whether this belief is actually true. We are never provided examples that might suggest that it is not true. For instance, Did Stalinist Russia's constitution and elections of democratic appearance and form protect the people of Russia? Did a government that was democratic in form prevent the rise of Hitler in Germany? Is the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, with its regular elections, a true republic? Were the general unable to rule Japan as a result of the Japanese constitution and elections? Moving a bit closer to home, what about the guaranteed protections outlined in the Constitution of the United States? Are these written quote-unquote protections sufficient to block the predation of an illegitimate ruling class? If you think they are, consider the following. Today, in the freest nation on earth, US representatives have claimed the authority to spy on their citizens without a warrant. This clearly violates the US Constitution. They have claimed the authority to arrest citizens and hold them forever without charges and without the right to challenge the legitimacy of their detention. Yeah, that's probably in the Patriot Act. This too violates the US Constitution. They have even claimed the authority to kill US citizens based on nothing more than an accusation. No judge, no jury, no public presentation of evidence or requirements to prove guilt. Alright, they kill on metadata, right? This is an egregious, never seen that word before, egregious violation of the individual protections outlined in the United States Constitution. Since US citizens never granted their representatives the authority to violate these legal restrictions on government power, these powers must have been seized. Rulers seize power. Representatives do not. As noted in Chapter 1, quickly referred to these rulers as the experts, who will replace the democratic voter in control of the political system. Here is where arguments about the inevitable destruction of national sovereignty really take root. In the eyes of the experts, it is merely a matter of time before one superior group of rulers finally achieves what all prior rulers have attempted. Sufficient power to compel obedience over all areas of the globe. Quickly explains the progression of global coercive power this way. Hold on, guys. The increasing offensive power of the Western weapons systems has made it possible to compel obedience over wider and wider areas and over larger numbers of people. Accordingly, political organizations, such as the state, have become larger in size and fewer in numbers. In this way, the political development of Europe over the last millennium has seen thousands of feudal areas coalesce into hundreds of principalities, and these into scores of dynastic monarchies, and, finally, into a dozen or more national states. The national state, its size measured in hundreds of miles, was possible only because it could apply force over hundreds of miles. As the technology of weapons, transportation, communication, and propaganda continued to develop, it became possible to compel obedience over areas measured in thousands of miles, and thus over distances greater than those occupied by existing linguistic and cultural groups. It thus became necessary to appeal for allegiance to the state on grounds wider than nationalism. This gave rise in the 1930s and 1940s to the idea of continental blocs and the ideological state, replacing the national state. Blah, blah. The consolidation that quickly describes is more than a collection of historical facts. It captures the immutable nature of coercive power. Unchecked, rulers will always consolidate and centralize their control until there is nothing left for them to seize. And, unfortunately, this applies to human freedom as well as geographic resources. One step leads to another, and every acquisition obtained to protect an earlier acquisition requires a new advance at a later date to protect it. So, accepting this reality, we wind up with a handful of important questions. Who are the rulers? To what extent can they compel obedience without meaningful resistance? How did they seize power? How do they maintain and expand their power? What are their unpunished crimes, past and present? Most importantly, what are the strategic targets that we must strike to destroy their illegitimate rule? In the following chapters, we'll cover all of this and more, but first we must begin at the beginning. So we're 10 minutes from the end or less, and now we're gonna begin at the beginning. Got 10 minutes left, guys. Its next heading is the birthplace of a network. Nearly 1,000 years ago, a university was founded in England. Nearly 1,000 years later, not only does that same university still exist, but it is ranked number 1 in the United Kingdom and constantly ranks among the top 10 universities in the world. As one of the most prestigious institutions of higher learning, specializing in politics, the psychological sciences and business, Oxford has a very long and distinguished history. It has produced dozens of prime ministers. It has produced archbishops, saints, famous economists like Adam Smith, and famous writers like Tolkien and Aldous Huxley, as well as philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Oxford also produced, approximately 150 years ago, the progenitors of the network. Let's flash back to this time in history at circa 1860. Two opposing forces in the British Empire are clashing heads. On one side, many are arguing that the empire is immoral, expensive and unnecessary. This argument, championed by men like William Gladstone, is eroding support for Britain's imperial policies. On the other side of the argument stands Benjamin Disraeli. Disraeli, a close ally of the Queen, is a harsh critic of Gladstone and other Little Englanders who dare to challenge the benefits and necessity of the empire. Having referred to Gladstone as God's only mistake, the intensive rivalry between Disraeli and Gladstone is legendary. The following provides one example of their many disagreements. Disraeli and Gladstone clashed over Britain's Balkan policy. Disraeli believed in upholding Britain's greatness through a tough, no-nonsense foreign policy that put Britain's interest above the moral law that advocated emancipation of small nations. Gladstone, however, saw the issue in moral terms. The Turks had massacred Bulgarian Christians, and Gladstone therefore believed it was immoral to support the Ottoman Empire. Because Gladstone's moral arguments were gaining ground, a new institute was formed to counter the rising tide of anti-imperialism. Quigley writes, The Royal Colonial Institute was founded in 1868 to fight the Little England idea. Disraeli as Prime Minister 1874 to 1880 dramatized the profit of glamour of empire by such acts as the purchase of control of the Suez Canal and by granting Queen Victoria the title of Empress of India. After 1870 it became increasingly evident that, however expensive colonies might be to a government, they could be fantastically profitable to individuals and companies supported by such governments. And so, to protect the profits of Britain's imperial policies, the rhetoric used to justify imperialism slowly began to change. One man, appointed to a newly created professorship at Oxford, led the charge in teaching Oxford undergraduate the new imperialism. The new imperialism after 1870 was quite different in tone from that which the Little Englanders had opposed earlier. The chief changes were that it was justified on grounds of moral duty and of social reform, and not, as earlier, on grounds of missionary activity and material advantage. The man most responsible for this change was John Ruskin. Ruskin spoke to the Oxford undergraduates as members of the privileged ruling class. He told them that they were the possessors of a magnificent tradition of education, beauty, rule of law, freedom, decency and self-discipline, but that this tradition could not be saved, and did not deserve to be saved, unless it could be extended to the lower class in England itself and to the non-English masses throughout the world. If this tradition were not extended to those two great majorities, the minority of upper-class Englishmen would ultimately be submerged by these majorities and the tradition lost. Alright guys, check out the website at reallibertymedia.com. I don't know who's listening, but there are a lot of people in the chat room there. I see Vince, I see Chell, I see Joanna, I see Moose Girl and Grimner, and of course Barman. Who can forget Barman? And at UCY, a couple of people there: Captain Gringo, Dan, EDF, Grump, Hopper, Jules, Possible Suspect, Shirley, and Shy, and Soul, and Tom, and V. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Check out freedomsnetwork.com, freedomsnetwork.com, reallibertymedia.com, and ucy.tv. I'll be back next week. In 6 days at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's the Freakers Ball at Real Liberty Media with Grimmer and I think Moose Girl. Check that out also. Take care, people. Next time. Thanks for listening.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific